We're looking at a courtroom that never adjourns. On the bench sits a towering judge holding an iron gavel, looking down at a small, hunched defendant. And if you look closely, they share the exact same face. This is the internal world of the punitiveness schema. It operates on a rigid set of absolute laws. Mistakes are strictly forbidden, and offering forgiveness is treated as a moral weakness. If you have this schema, human imperfection doesn't feel like a natural state of being. It feels like a crime, and that crime demands severe retribution, with no room for extenuating circumstances or basic compassion. The result is a corrupted internal justice system. The punishment never fits the offense, because the ultimate offense you are being sentenced for is simply being human. To see how this plays out in adulthood, look at this diagram. The punitiveness schema operates as a double sentence, pointing its harsh judgments in two directions simultaneously, outward at the world and inward at the self. The outward sentence manifests as explosive intolerance toward minor infractions. You might see a person permanently cut off a longtime friend over a single forgotten birthday, driven by rigid black and white moral thinking. Meanwhile, the inward sentence applies a crushing weight of self-criticism. A minor typo in an email becomes a reason to obsess for days, denying yourself basic rest or joy as a form of penance. The strangest part of this process is the internal experience. The person dispensing these sentences doesn't feel cruel. To them, it simply feels like upholding high standards and maintaining personal integrity. By disguising cruelty as righteousness, the punisher traps themselves in a constant state of hostility. They build a life where absolutely no one, especially not themselves, is ever safe from the gavel. This false justice system is usually constructed in childhood. It takes root in authoritarian households where harsh physical or verbal punishment was the standard response to everyday behavior. When a child receives an enormous punishment for spilling a glass of water or forgetting a minor chore, the developing brain takes notes. It wires itself to expect that any misstep, no matter how small, will guarantee severe suffering. This dynamic rarely starts with the parents. Harsh discipline is frequently passed down through family trees or religious frameworks, defended as the right way to raise a child. The parent is often just applying the rules they survived themselves. That leads to the most devastating feature of the schema. The internal judge demanding perfection today isn't dispensing objective truth. It is simply an echo of the original punisher's worldview, absorbed and internalized by the child long after the actual abuser is gone. To survive the constant threat of this internal tribunal, the mind deploys three distinct coping strategies. These pathways, surrender, avoidance, and overcompensation, represent how a person manages the fear of making a mistake. The first strategy is surrender. This creates the self-punisher, who accepts the harsh judgment as absolute fact. They become their own jailer, relentlessly denying themselves comfort and assuming they deserve every bit of suffering for their flaws. The second strategy is avoidance, acting as a perfectionist shield. The person compulsively micromanages their life to ensure everything is flawless. If there are zero mistakes, the judge has nothing to rule on, but the cost is complete isolation and crushing anxiety. The third strategy is overcompensation, creating the outward judge. Here, the person avoids their own pain by projecting the punishment onto others. They control employees, partners, or children through moral superiority, becoming the very parent who punished them. Beneath these strategies are three distinct clinical modes competing for control. The punitive parent demands absolute perfection. The defective child silently accepts the blame, and the angry child lashes out at the imperfections of everyone else. All three of these strategies ultimately fail. They operate on the false promise that if you can just achieve total perfection, you will finally be safe from pain. But perfection is impossible, so the trial just keeps running. Recovery begins when a new voice enters the room, the healthy adult mode. The turning point is the realization that your internal critic is a learned reflex, not an infallible moral compass. The healthy adult understands the distinct clinical difference between punishment and accountability. This matrix lays it out. Punishment is a downward spiral built entirely on fear and shame. Accountability is an upward staircase, offering a structure for actual growth and responsibility. You practice this by forcing a pause before you react. You look at a mistake and intentionally ask, would I assign this same harsh consequence to a dear friend? Would I speak to a small child this way? The punitive mind will fight this, terrified that letting go means giving a free pass. But forgiving a mistake is not the same as condoning it. It simply means releasing the weight of permanent judgment. Setting down the gavel requires learning a difficult but necessary truth. Holding high standards and extending mercy are partners, not opposites. Breaking the intergenerational chain of this schema is an active choice. It requires looking objectively at the heavy gavel you've been handed and intentionally choosing not to strike with it. We have to accept that pain is a terrible teacher. Endless punishment doesn't manufacture genuine goodness. It only manufactures fear. This brings us to the empty bench. The bravest act the inner judge can take is to step down from that towering seat, set the iron gavel aside, and sit beside the person they have spent a lifetime sentencing. When you finally pair accountability with compassion, the mind's endless courtroom can at last permanently adjourn.